House do now adjourn. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks to those who joined me for this extremely important debate. Reducing youth violence is an issue that I know we all care about. And even though I'm a London MP, this is very much a national issue. One of my very sad Google alerts is knife crime. I was reading an article where Birmingham Mail editor Mark Rees said on Newsnight, "Whatever the debate around Brexit, people are dying on the streets of Birmingham. They want to see that on the agenda for a change."
This is a very important debate. And could I ask colleagues who are having other conversations perhaps do it outside the chamber? Thank you. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I completely agree with you about how important this debate should be our #1 priority for us. Our young people need to feel safe. They need to know that we believe in them. They are, after all, our future doctors, nurses, engineers, artists, journalists, hey, even our future politicians. And I understand in the gallery this evening we have a few would-be politicians who've joined us, and I want to thank you for coming along this evening. As chair of the Cross-Party Youth Violence Commission, we have been examining the root causes of youth violence, and in July this year we published our initial policy recommendations in which we called for the development of a public health model to tackle violence. And I'm delighted that since then, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, has announced the establishment of a London Violence Reduction Unit which will follow a public health approach in the capital. And last week, the Home Secretary also stated that we must treat violence as an infectious disease, backing the adoption of a public health approach. But now we must turn those words into action. And tonight, I'm focusing on the important role youth service play in tackling youth violence and how these services fit in to a successful public health approach. I have met with countless organisations up and down the country who do excellent work with young people. But cuts to youth services has left the sector hollowed out, inconsistent, disjointed, and it's young people who are ultimately losing out. Since 2010, at least £387 million has been cut from youth services. More than 600 youth services have closed between 2012 and 2016, and the only programme we see consistently funded is National Citizen Service. While youth services have suffered real-term cuts of 54% since 2011, funding for NCS has increased annually, rising from a 3-year allocation of £168 million when it was first set up to £181 million last year alone. The NCS is a 2-week programme once a year. Our young people need year-round support. And I do wonder if NCS would pass the stringent criteria that many other charities have to go through when seeking funding. Yeah, of course.
Just thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and for I sought the intervention earlier for her approval. In my constituency, the Honourable Member, as I've spoken to her, will know that we've had an organisation, a community-based organisation. It's just a thought that comes from the church. It's church-based, it's faith-based, it's community-based. It has the support of government bodies and the police, and it's called Street Pastors. It has reduced significantly anti-social misbehaviour and violence in my constituency. Could I gently suggest to the Honourable Lady that may be a method, another method of perhaps addressing the issue of youth and violence and anti-social behaviour, and I'd be more than happy to commend that organisation to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I think he's absolutely right. You know, faith, groups, faith work play an instrumental role in terms of reducing youth violence. And if I think to my own organisation and a local pastor called Ben Lindsay and the wonderful work that he goes and does in Lewisham, and actually the wonderful advice that he goes and gives me at different times in terms of engaging with the faith community, you know, I absolutely agree with everything that he's gone and said. Now, funding challenges has made the sector super competitive. Local charities with similar aims have little incentive to collaborate because they're both bidding for the same pots of money. Large organisations with professional bid writers are much more likely to get funding than smaller charities, even if these charities are doing good work on the ground. On top of this, funding is too often allocated for short periods, and core funding is especially difficult to come by. So we are left with an environment which discourages collaboration and reinforces inconsistency. Now imagine we have a teenager. He's grown up in a household where he witnesses domestic violence regularly. His mother self-medicates, his father is largely absent, but when he is around, he's violent. At school, he's disrupted. And as he gets older, he's bounced about between different services. No one sticks around for particularly very long, and the services do not communicate with one another or share data. External involvement in this younger person's life is disjointed and inconsistent, reinforcing his belief that no one really cares about what happens to him. A young person like this is crying out for just one adult who cares, who will stick around in their life for as long as it takes to make a difference. Research from Public Health Wales backs this up, showing that access to a trusted adult in childhood could significantly reduce the negative consequences associated with ACEs, that's adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, of course. Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate her on securing this debate. As ever, she's making a very powerful point and she's an asset to this House and to all the people that she's seeking to help. On that point of trusted adults, in Croydon they did a review of the 60 serious violence cases amongst young people, and of those 60 cases, one of the factors that affected everyone was a lack of a trusted adult. And does she agree with me that youth services not only have been cut, but also their professionalism that they bring has been massively downgraded? It's very difficult to reach, hard to reach young people, and that we should give that more attention, because really this is an incredibly professional sector and it doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I couldn't agree with her more. And I know that she's also been doing excellent work with the Knife Crime APVG and has worked very closely with us in terms of the work of the Youth Violence Commission. And I know it's an issue that's very, very close to her heart ever since she was first elected. ACEs are traumatic experiences in a young person's life which can have massive repercussions on that individual's life chances. People who've grown up with 4 or more ACEs, and that's only 9% of the population, are 10 times more likely to be involved in violence by the time they are 18, compared to the 52% of young people who've experienced none. Sustainable relationships can go some way to reducing the negative consequence of ACEs.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and can I congratulate her not just on securing this debate, but on the incredible work she has done ever since being elected in 2015 on pushing this agenda and on pushing the agenda around public health, because a lot of people bandy the term public health and they use it to mean lots of different things, but the only way it can be successful is with a truly whole system approach, and that means every agency, from the police to schools and to youth services, taking into account adverse childhood experiences. And does she agree with me that that consequently means delivering a trauma-informed approach?
I thank my friend for that intervention, and she is absolutely right. And I know that we've had some discussions about going and visiting trauma-informed schools in the future, and I do think that we need to have a much, much bigger focus in terms of trauma-informed approaches and really starting to understand what that means and the impact on young people who've gone and experienced trauma. Now, in terms of some people that do understand that experience, the youth workers that I have met with completely understand the importance of building and maintaining relationships with the young people that they work with. They know that the positive impact that this can have on a young person's life, especially a young person who may not have other adults in their life that they can rely on, being that positive role model. But instead of investment in long-term sustainable relationships, we're seeing piecemeal interventions, little pots of money invested in short programmes. So what can we do? Well, here are a few things we've recommended from the Youth Violence Commission. Develop a national youth policy framework which would have the provision of youth work on a statutory duty. Ensure any adult working with young people is professionally trained, especially in recognising the signs of trauma. And all youth workers to be trained in the same way that we expect social workers to be trained. Policies and practices should be evidence-informed and developed, and youth workers should be recognised, supported and respected in their field. Building young people's resilience and ensuring they can cope with and bounce back from adversity. Providing positive role models, peer mentors and raising low aspirations and self-confidence. At the moment, the youth sector is an unregulated marketplace, and whilst we want to see innovation taking place, we also want to ensure we hold youth work to nationally recognised standards. We need a much more consistent approach with a focus on long-term results, not just short-term interventions. Youth centres need to be open access, safe spaces for young people. And it should go without saying, but key to youth work is listening to the voices of young people. And it shouldn't take a genius to recognise this, but their experiences and views should be at the core and inform the delivery of youth services. When the Youth Violence Commission conducted our Safer Lives survey, we asked young people, if there was one thing you could change that you think would make young people safer, what would it be? The most popular response was the provision of more youth centres, sports clubs and youth activities in their local areas. Now, I did ask the Home Office to also respond to this debate because this is not an issue that DCS can take away by themselves and tackle. But I do have some questions I'd like the Minister to answer. Youth workers, teachers and police officers have told the Commission that the most dangerous time for knife attacks between young people is between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m, after school finishes and before parents finish work. But the Office for National Statistics, Met Police, MOPAC, City Hall's London Data Store, London Ambulance Dispatch Data, Centre for Crime and Justice Studies and the wonderful House of Commons Library have been unable to get us data on the times at which knife attacks take place. When professionals in the field are consistently raising concerns about after-school attacks and grooming, why is this data not collected? Will the Minister commit to obtaining this data and publishing it? And does the Minister agree that after-school youth work and activities could help to keep young people safe? Now, I do not believe that we will ever reduce the level of violence without addressing ACEs. And I do worry that too many people don't understand the impact of ACEs in Parliament. We have been glad of the expertise of the Honourable Member for Norfolk, who unfortunately isn't here, but he's really helped in terms of informing our recommendations. Will the Minister commit to reviewing the impact of ACEs and developing a plan to address them? And will the Government commit to reviewing its funding model for the sector to ensure it's more collaborative and less competitive, so we can deliver a regulated youth service which any young person can access as and when they need it? Now, many young people have said to me that they are treated like they are part of the problem when they should be at the heart of the solution. So my question is, what consultations has the Government taken with young people to find out the kind of youth provision they would like to see? And finally, I've sent the Minister a copy of the Youth Violence Commission's interim report, And I was really glad to hear that she's gone and read the recommendations and the report in detail. So what I would ask is if she can commit or comment on the parts of that that relate to the youth services and the youth sector. And if the government is serious about adopting a public health strategy, it is the responsibility of every department to understand what this is, what this means, and to address the root causes of violence. Youth services play a role in tackling youth violence, but as do schools, councils, social workers, hospitals, mental health services, the police, and every other service which touches the life of a young person. A genuine public health approach to violence must be cross-departmental and cross-party. So I do hope the Minister will raise my concerns with her department and her counterparts across government, and I look forward to hearing her responses to my questions.
Minister Tracy Crouch.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Honourable Lady for Lewisham Deptford for bringing this important issue to the floor of the House, but also to Mr Speaker for granting this debate on an incredibly sensitive but very, very important issue as well. Now, this might be a shock to the House, a ministerial confession. I have actually read the interim report of the Youth Violence Commission and in preparation for this debate, and I can honestly say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that as a daughter of a social worker who did children and families for her entire career, it is exactly the kind of commission that I would have wanted to be on if I was still on the backbenches. I think the report is absolutely excellent and it makes an extremely important contribution to the complex area of policy. Now, I know the Honourable Lady will appreciate that of the recommendations outlined in the report, only that of youth services falls within my portfolio. So my apologies to her and to the House if I can't go into detail regarding other departmental policy areas with the same level of confidence that I do on my own. However, I will make sure that my private office do circulate her speech to colleagues that this does affect, because actually in relation to some of the questions that she asked as part of the preparation of her speech, I'm not entirely sure that I can answer those questions because I don't think they fall within my brief. So, for example, the question on ACES, while I completely appreciate some of the connections with youth services, that would probably fall more squarely in the remit of my colleague who deals with, in DFE, who probably deals with social services, for example. And on the issue of data collection, I'm not entirely sure that the issue around collection of data on knife attacks would fall into the remit of DCMS. However, they are very important, very valid questions to ask, and therefore I will make sure that the colleagues who are potentially responsible for that will provide her with answers to those questions. Give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I'm grateful that she will raise these with the other departments, but part of the public health approach is actually making sure that all of those different departments do work together in terms of developing the solution. So I'll just...
Yeah, I'm grateful, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I am now sort of kind of an expert on cross-departmental strategies, having been the Minister responsible for the sports strategy, which involves 10 departments, the Office of Civil Society strategy, which involves numerous departments, and shortly the loneliness strategy, which covers 9 government departments. So I completely appreciate and understand the important point that she's making. Madam Deputy Speaker, I do know, while I might not know all the answers to the Honourable Lady's questions, I do know that this government has no higher priority for young people than to keep them safe, which is why I'm pleased to say to the Honourable Lady that we broadly welcome the Commission's recommendations, some of which actually anticipated policy announcements that we have since made. There is much we can agree on. For example, the roots to the problem of youth violence are complex. There are no quick fixes. The solution does not lie with any particular department of government or a single part of the community. And we need a systematic approach backed by strong and consistent leadership. And I'm sure that we all can agree that the recent announcement by the Home Secretary to consult on the new legal duty to underpin a public health approach to serious violence is welcome. This would mean police officers, education partners, local authority and healthcare professionals would have a new legal duty to take action and prevent violent crime. And the statutory duty would make serious violence a top priority for all key partners, ensuring that all agencies are working together to prevent young people being caught in the criminal cycle. Of course.
way, and I saw that announcement from the Home Secretary, and I did question how it would be any different from their current responsibilities under crime and disorder partnerships that were introduced under the last Labour government. I appreciate this isn't necessarily the Minister's responsibility, but I would be grateful if she could elaborate somehow on how it will be improved or enhanced under their existing relationships, existing responsibilities, which do require them to work together to prevent crime.
Deputy Speaker, I wouldn't dream of inadvertently misleading the House by trying to respond to a question in another department that I wouldn't know the answer to. But there is a Home Office official in the box this evening who will be able to, I'm sure, elaborate or rather provide a written response to the Honourable Lady's questions, and Home Office questions, I'm sure, are just around the corner. However, let me just say that an essential part of the approach to partnership, as the report notes, is to address early intervention. And the bit that of money that I'm responsible, the £90 million dormant accounts money, which was recently announced, and the £200 million Youth Endowment Fund that was announced by the Home Secretary will help address this issue. Now, I'm not pretending that it's going to solve the issues, but both are designed to provide long-term support and learning. Now, the Commission also calls for the reform of youth services, and I agree with the number of points in this section of the report, including that funding and services are fragmented and siloed. Now, the House may have missed it, but in early August I published the Civil Society Strategy, and within that I committed to a review of the statutory duty for local authority youth services. If following that review the guidance needs to be strengthened, then we will do so. But it's not all about government, though, and that was very much acknowledged in the Commission's report. We need the public, private, social and faith sectors to work much more closely together at a community level. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it is really important this House gets to celebrate the positive role youth work can play in keeping our young people safe. I, as I'm sure we all do, recognise the transformational impact high-quality interventions can have on all young people, but especially for those who are vulnerable to exploitation or at risk of making poor life choices. And we value the role that community youth organisations have in building trust between young people and the wider community. They can play an important role in signposting and facilitating access to services and overcoming barriers to engagement. Now, of course, it would be foolish not to acknowledge that there have been cuts to local authority youth services, but there has also been a substantial innovation in new forms of delivery. I will, after just this point, not least in the Honourable Lady's home borough, where Youth First, the mutual that delivers youth services in Lewisham, has received direct funding from DCMS to develop its capacity. But it's also worth acknowledging the support the Home Office has given to the For Jimmy project in 3 schools in Deptford as part of the Safe Haven project. A trusted relationship with a responsible adult or peer, a safe space, finding a teachable moment are key parts of this youth work approach, and we support them. I give way to Honourable Chair.
Well, she's absolutely right about what she's just said, but I also recognise that youth services have had significant reductions in resource, and that has led to a hollowing out of youth services across the country, and the voluntary and community sector alone cannot fill that gap. Will she use her leadership role, which we all applaud, to actually make sure not only the rhetoric there is, but the resources there too?
And, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the reason for the review of the statutory guidance. It is something that is provided by local authorities, but we do recognise that there is that difference of delivery and service across the board, which is why we're having a look as part of the civil society strategy. I will.
We all recognise in this chamber, those who are here and those who are outside of it, the Minister's intense interest in these matters, and we thank her for that. In my intervention to the Honourable Lady who brought the matter forward, I referred to the faith groups, and Minister, in your response to the Honourable Lady, you referred to it as well. Can I ask, has the Minister had any chance to speak to some of the street pastors, for example, because these faith groups coming from within the community do a great work on a voluntary basis. I'm not saying you take advantage of the voluntary, they want to do it, and I'm just wondering, Minister, if you've had that opportunity.
I meet regularly with a whole variety of faith groups on a number of different issues, not just as a minister, but of course in my own constituency. And so, I completely recognise and value the work that faith groups have and especially when they work in partnership with many other different organisations as well. Just to talk a bit more about the funding that is available out there as well. At present, DCMS, together with the Big Lottery Fund, are investing £40 million in the Youth Investment Fund to directly support community youth provision across England, including London and the West Midlands, both of which are areas of concern. There's also a further £40 million investment into the I Will Fund, which will support young people to take action on the issues that they care about, which I think was one of the key points that the Honourable Lady made in her speech, which is making sure that young people themselves are engaged in the process of delivering some of those services. The Honourable Lady also mentioned the National Citizen Service, whose central aim, the social mixing of young people from all kinds of backgrounds, is absolutely key. And on a recent visit to an NCS programme in another South London borough, I was able to meet many of these youngsters and hear their positive experiences of NCS. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I also believe it's worth giving some examples of exactly how DCMS funding is having an effect. And Red Thread, which is a charity with a 20-year track record in supporting young people through health and education programmes, is a really good example of that. Its youth violence intervention work puts key workers in hospital emergency departments to engage with young people at the most vulnerable and to give them help to put their lives back together when they most need it. And government is supporting it, the extension of this work from its London base to Nottingham and Birmingham. Madam Deputy Speaker, the effective solutions are proven to be ones that connect young people to their loved ones, their neighbourhood and to the wider society. And there are many other recommendations in the report, and I feel my brief response just on youth services doesn't do them justice. However, there was just one other point that was made that I really want to pick up on in the report. In the section on increasing employment opportunities, there's a reference to the shortage of BME role models involved in schools and youth organisations. I think we can extend that across the board. And I wanted to just say to the Honourable Lady that I really share the concern that her and the other commissioners had with my other hat on, that of Sports Minister. And I've been working with sporting organisations to see how we can change that. Many youngsters look up to their sports stars, whatever the sport, and we quite often use sport as an intervention programme within youth and serious violence. But if they don't have those role models and they don't see someone that they can relate to, how can they ever believe that there is something out there for them and to achieve further? So we need more BME leaders in sport, from the grassroots to the top of the elite sporting pyramid. And that is something that I feel very strongly about, and I was pleased to see that in her section in the report. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we recognise there have been recent increases in murders, gun crime and knife crime, and these increases have been accompanied by a shift towards younger victims and perpetrators. However, statistics don't matter for a nanosecond to those caught up in the awful consequences of violence, the victim, their family and friends, or indeed their communities. And the impact of such crimes is devastating. And that is why the government published the Serious Violence Strategy earlier this year. The strategy represents a step change in the way we think and respond to serious violence, and in particular the strategy stresses the importance of early intervention to tackle the root causes of serious violence and provide young people with the skills and resilience to lead productive lives free from violence. And while the causes and consequences of youth violence are often complex, effective solutions need not be. They can come from partnerships across government, local councils, the criminal justice system, voluntary sector, and most importantly within the communities themselves. I believe this is the approach outlined in the interim report, and I think we can all look forward to the final report of the Commission. But until then, may I just conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by not only thanking the Honourable Lady for securing this debate, but also to the other Commissioners, the advisory and academic team, the Secretariat, and of course all those who gave evidence to ensure that future policy development on this issue is considered responsibly and consistently throughout central and local government.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.